Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan India's national television channel about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and regional and global security and economic developments that have a bearing on India's rise. Viewers, in this episode, we are looking at the phenomenon of the Islamic State or ISIS and how it has metastasized and become a bigger challenge for international security. Series of deadly, devastating and spine-chilling attacks in many countries have brought the ISIS phenomenon back to the fore after a lull. Why is ISIS surging again, and what are its implications? What are the threats that it poses to international security and to India? This is the theme for today's discussion. And to take us through this, I'm very privileged to introduce you to two domain experts who are joining me in the studio. Let me introduce you to them. Dr. Soumya Awasthi is an expert member at the Center on Armed Groups in Geneva, Switzerland. Welcome, Dr. Awasthi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sreeram.
I'm also joined by Dr. Shalini Chawla. She is Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies, an important think tank in India. Welcome, Dr. Chawla.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So, to begin with, let me come to you, Dr. Awasthi. You have written recently in the Hindustan Times an important explainer about this ISIS resurgence or re-emergence because after 2017, when the so-called caliphate was decimated by allied operations of different countries in Syria and Iraq, people thought that the ISIS phenomenon was going to become scattered and fragmented and not as effective as it used to be when they had the so-called proto-state of their own. But now we have seen a horrific attack in Moscow in concert hall with more than 150 casualties. Then we have seen a few months ago a big suicide bombing in Kerman in Iran at the annual commemoration of General Qasem Soleimani's assassination, and several other smaller attacks that we are seeing, including in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, but also spread out. There is a so-called ISIS West Africa province, there is ISIS Khorasan, and some are saying that there is even an ISIS Hind in India. So, this group seems to be like some kind of a hydra that you chop off some parts of it, but then it keeps coming back. It's like a hydra-headed monster, and it is really increasing the jitters around the world about this non-conventional threat to security. So, could you please start by talking about why is ISIS quote-unquote bouncing back? See, it seems to be, and what can we expect from this group going forward, because they've already made a mark through these extremely bloody attacks lately.
Yeah, so basically when you think about ISIS, which was originally started from Syria and Iraq, that time people thought that after the NATO forces had very successfully destroyed their group and the base camp, we thought that the phenomena is over. Till about 2019, there was a conversation in the intelligence agencies and amongst the countries that the ISIS is a dead phenomena. There is nothing like ISIS anymore. And soon after that, we saw that there was a sudden resurgence of Islamic State of Khorasan province, which is basically the Afghanistan, Central Asia region, because they claim that we are still existing, and the ambition behind it is having a caliphate seat in the region, and they want to reclaim the older Khorasan geographical area, which involved parts of Iran, Afghanistan, and some parts of Central Asia as well. So they want to claim that area back, and the reason they are able to come back again and again is because what I feel, I perceive as looking at it from close eye, that their presence in the virtual world is very, very strong. And that is the reason they are able to keep their image fresh in the memory of people who are sympathizing with such groups and with such kind of ambitions like caliphate movement. So it becomes easy for them to sustain their presence.
Through the internet?
Yes, through the internet. So if you go back to 2014 period, there was a virtual planning concept which was there within the ISIS, which talked about the next 10 to 15 years, that how they have to sustain themselves. And in that virtual planning, they actually depended a lot on the use of technology. So due to the use of technology, they are able to gather support from the sympathizers around the world, and that is helping them a lot in logistical execution of their objectives. So when you talk about attacks in Paris or attack in what happened in Russia, it wasn't that it was centralized. ISIS has been a very decentralized organization since the beginning, and that is what has given them benefit and has led them in this successful manner. So this is one
So
of
by its very nature, it seems more sustainable
yes.
than top-down type of terrorist organizations, which have got one supreme leader and that kind of
so
thing.
unlike what you see in Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri was the last one, and so he was the emir of Al-Qaeda even for the subsets like AQIS or the one present in other parts of Africa, let's say. So unlike those that group, ISIS has decentralized itself, and each center has their own emir. So they don't directly depend on one central figure, but they have their regional emir who are commanding them. So that is why they are able to sustain their existence.
Right. Dr. Chawla, so it's decentralized, and that's one of its strengths, and that's why it seems to be, reinventing or having so many rebirths. Now, you have been studying Afghanistan, Pakistan for decades, and there was a fear when the Americans left in 2021 and when Kabul fell to Taliban, that it would once again become a sanctuary, a safe haven for transnational terror groups. And now the US intelligence, they are saying that they have conveyed to regional governments information they have about potential multiple dozens of terror attacks being planned by ISIS Khorasan using some provinces of Afghanistan like Badakhshan on the north, Nangarhar in the east, and so on. And even though the Taliban are supposedly sworn enemies of ISIS, ISIS is thriving and is building, it seems, and ISIS seems to be increasing in strength and its striking abilities. What we saw across the border in Iran during Qasem Soleimani's commemoration, for example, it was just a spillover. And we also see some ISIS attacks inside Pakistan also on the other side, although that's more complicated because there's the Baloch insurgency and all, which are not linked to ISIS. So would you like to talk about why is it that Afghanistan has once again become this sanction? Why is the Taliban not able to crush or completely obliterate this ISIS phenomenon? No, what's going on there?
Thank you for a brilliant question. And, just taking from where Soumya left, so on this whole issue about Taliban, how they are managing with the ISIS, we have two distinct, totally contradictory narratives. Well, the Taliban continuously have claimed that they have managed to control ISIS. On the other hand, the reports are showing a different picture. We also are seeing the deadly attacks that have come in, and like Soumya said, their kind of whole desire to gain prominence in the world of terrorism, ISIS. Now, we have to keep in mind why Afghanistan, because basically IS Khorasan, you see that a majority of the elements there are the factions from Taliban, TTP, Al-Qaeda. So they have been made out of these factions which came out of the fissures between these organizations. So they do maintain very strong regional roots there. And then they expanded with this regional agenda, and the Central Asia was the key focus. And that's why a lot of reports are now suggesting, Tajik militants as a part of Khorasan.
The ones in the Moscow concert hall were
Moscow
Tajiks.
Also, and Iran also.
Yes, yes.
Now, this is one side. Second factor is that, for the Taliban, I think, whatever we have studied, they are finding it very difficult to now, crack down on the urban cells of ISKP. Because what ISKP did after its defeat in Syria and Iran to a certain extent, that there was a change in strategy that we saw. So there was a change very clearly, which they announced also, was no more about controlling territory, but it was about urban warfare. Urban warfare, so leading to attacks, destruction in the cities, which would challenge the authority of Taliban in those cities. And also terrorist networking is something they expanded. So for example, the Easter bombing that you saw in Sri Lanka was happened where a local terror group did the attack on the behest of ISIS. Now, Taliban has traditionally been an insurgent group. So from an insurgent group taking up a role of a counter insurgency, it's a different domain for them. So that is another issue. Plus, also what we discussed, that ability of the ISIS, and it's a very resilient organization which has really managed to recarve itself against all its odds. So that they have done. Propaganda machine is extremely strong. Another factor is that what you see in Afghanistan, the humanitarian crisis, there are a lot of disgruntled youth which can be very easily motivated and attracted by the ISIS. And Taliban, I don't think, still have the capacity to do the interact with the community and manage that, because that is another factor. And lastly, and very importantly, what I feel is that, lack of the capability with Taliban, where they are actually increasing the numbers of recruits for sure in terms of their, security setup, but the equipment they don't have. So for this to deal with that threat, obviously high-end equipment with help, and since Taliban is not recognized force till now, none of the countries have recognized. So that part also they are lacking, although there have been reports that the American equipment that was left is with Taliban and some has been with TTP. But yes, that is another part of the capability, how much they can control. But the strong roots of ISIS they're mingling up with the community. They're the factions of the TTP, Taliban, Al-Qaeda being part of ISIS. All these factors are responsible for them to make that a base.
And bad governance obviously is a big issue. Dr. Awasthi, you have written about grievances and local grievances. And in a decentralized terrorist organization like ISIS, they obviously play on the grievances to recruit.
Yes.
And Shalini ji was talking about that being a factor with the tremendous economic collapse in Afghanistan. So please tell us more about what are these. Give us some examples. I mean, why are the Tajiks ethnic community in Afghanistan and across the border, why are they enrolling in ISIS in large numbers now? And likewise, different communities, why is there so much disillusionment and despair leading to this pipeline of people going for jihad?
So just like you said, give us an example. I would like to tell my audience that it's very strange that they talk about poverty, unemployment, and it's surprising that people are actually using this as a propaganda tool to recruit people and to talk about anti-government and anti-national ideologies. So for example, Tajiks, we will talk about it. Tajiks went from their own homeland to Russia for work. They got working visa, but
as immigrant laborers.
Yes, as immigrant laborers, and some of them went in through illegal means as well for the mode of earning money and sustaining their lives. So while doing that, they overstayed their time permit, and now when they were taken back by the government, put in the jail for illegally staying, overstretching their stay here, they were not treated properly in the jail. So this is how sympathy gained momentum.
And in the case of Russia, there is also the Russian involvement in the Syrian war.
Yes.
And
so,
the
so
attempts by Russia to join the anti-ISIS.
So one of them was recent 2015 when Russia did aerial bombing in Syria, and it was supporting Bashar al-Assad's government. So that was not liked by ISIS. This was second number. And then there was another reason, the history. So they go back to the Khorasan thing, that earlier Russia was not, so under Soviet Union, what happened with these ethnicities. So these became some of the additional problems. So these are some of the basic narratives that are used by these propaganda machines.
So it's
which
not
are run-
only economic grievance, but there are many other.
so history, religion, so social,
ideological. Yeah. Shalini ji, the Russian response, official response from President Putin downwards has been that, okay, these are done by Islamists and jihadists, but they are being aided by Ukraine. And that seems, quite illogical. But the question is, and even when the Iranians, when the massive suicide bombing happened some months ago, they said that it is a handiwork of Israel and by the US and by the enemies of Israel, of Iran, rather than ISIS per se. So, because these countries are embroiled in major wars and in regional geopolitical tussles, it seems like their number one priority is more the conventional struggles that they are waging, and therefore these terrorists are able to sneak through these in that kind of an environment and carry out the mayhem. And that way, ISIS may be benefiting from these geopolitical fissures. If not, it's unlikely that Israel funded ISIS or Ukraine funded ISIS. I mean, these sound like a little conspiracy theories, but then the official narrative continues to insist that our conventional foes are the forces behind ISIS, and ISIS is not a real threat. The real threat is our conventional foes. So that may be actually defeating the whole purpose of counter-terrorism, right? If you're so focused on your geopolitical rivalries, then you will not be able to fight a genuinely transnational, non-state force like ISIS.
You're absolutely right. You're spot on that. And when the terror organizations will always benefit from these kind of wars in the region what are happening. One is that the main actors involved are completely distracted, which we discussed, from the internal security dynamics. And second factor, which you talked about, that ISIS will take the advantage of that factor, that it can have it can easily move away from that blame, and the onus of the attack might not come into her, and the brunt will be faced by the other actors involved in the conflict. Second factor is, whenever you have these regional conflicts that we are seeing right now, this will invariably lead to humanitarian crisis, illegal migration. All that helps the terror organizations. Now, if you see even these conflicts at a very regional level in our neighborhood, on Afghanistan-Pakistan border, you see the tensions from the last 2 years. Who is the biggest beneficiary of those tensions? TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Now, because of those tensions, you have more than like 1.7 million Afghans who were now expelled from Pakistan. And obviously TTP cherished that, because they could find their recruits there with amongst the migrants who were going there. I mean, that was one of the big factor there. And I think lastly, very importantly, which you hinted on also, that how these conflicts deter the counter-insurgency phenomena overall. So while we have discussed and talked about the fact that ISIS has really evolved in terms of its strategy, moving from territory control to urban warfare, integrating with the other regional organizations, being a very resilient force, and having immense propaganda machinery. So while ISIS has really evolved in its strategies, but the counter-insurgency strategies have not evolved at the same pace. And very importantly, while in the region, there is a commonality of this challenge. ISIS, everybody is worried about ISIS. In fact, if you go back,
even the Chinese,
because
Chinese have also been attacked.
So if you go back even before 2021, when the regional actors had started to engage with Taliban, what was the common threat there was to deter ISIS?
Yes.
Be it Russia, China, Iran,
the Americans,
everybody was wanting Taliban to take the responsibility of dealing with. So there is a commonality of challenge, but there is no common consensus in terms of approaching it. So that is a big vacuum in the region, and that is the vacuum that ISIS has managed to gain from tremendously.
So disunity always helps terrorist groups to exploit the fissures and the chaos.
Yes.
And Dr. Awasthi, it's ironic because we have this pan-regional organization called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is supposed to deal exactly with the phenomena like ISIS, but it's not working clearly. And I mean, they may have some mechanisms for joint exercises and such things, and training and such things, but beyond a point, the divisions and the rivalries inhibit, I think, full cooperation among the member states to really, completely crush this phenomenon?
Yeah, so if you see membership of Shanghai Cooperation Group or Islamic Cooperation or any such regional multilateral groups, you will find that they all come together only in the in name of 3 or 4 broad categories: fighting terrorism, economic cooperation, development, and cultural integrity. But when you study the bilateral relations between these individual countries, you will find there are a lot of differences because especially given these Islamic countries, for example, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth, they are now shifting their narrative from being a pure Islamic oriented government to being more democratic in their functioning. Even if they have not adopted democratic constitution, let's say they are more kingdom based, but their methods are changing. So we see shift in the Saudi Arabia, and we see the regular statements coming out of the countries saying that we do not support Pakistan's objective of support this giving safe haven to terrorist organizations. So there are differences which are playing here.
Moderate and extremist countries.
Yes. And hence they are not able to come together and cooperate against the counter-terrorism operations.
Yes, that's the real tragedy. Shalini ji, last round, India, we have had some ISIS cells. We have had some unfortunate instances of young men, especially from Kerala, traveling, even fighting against the Assad regime in Syria. Some have been even killed in Iraq and Syria. And then there are so-called cover organizations for ISIS in India, like the Popular Front and such things, which have been busted. But there is always a lurking fear that ISIS does want to strike in India, and our agencies, of course, are trying to deter this. But internal security and foreign policy, what do you think we should do to make sure we are ISIS-proof, or at least that ISIS, even Kashmir Valley, we have seen some instances of ISIS-inspired jihadism, which is somewhat different from the classic, Pakistani-backed jihadism. Have we become, because traditionally we have seen that state-sponsored terror is our number one threat. Is that the reason why we have not looked at non-state, genuine non-state threats? Because sometimes people say, oh no, there is nothing called ISIS. It is, at the end of the day, it is only Pakistan-backed terrorism. So do we have to also, rethink our fundamental approach to this, given the rising, this online radicalization and this transnational phenomenon that we are seeing?
Brilliant question, I would say. Yes, see, for India, our threat around us is very, very complicated. So we have the external factors, we have boundary sharing, we have boundary disputes, we have terrorism, we have proxy war, and internally, if you see, we have insurgency, we have extremism, we have number of, so there is a commingling of multiple, layers of threat that we face, and a very complicated structure that we see here. But I think given that, given these facts, I think we have still managed, till now we have, I think, managed relatively well, I would say. But you are absolutely right that there is a tendency to overlook this threat because we have Pakistan-sponsored terrorism and we see everything from that prism. I think that is what you wanted to ask. So I think if we see the history, how we have managed to control, to deal with ISIS, I think Maharashtra had a very good case where ATS has been made responsible, and what India has done up till now is to strike on the causes. So de-radicalization has been our prime focus to deal with the ISIS
rather than
issues.
a purely military response.
So it has been more about de-radicalization programs. So we saw an excellent model which was built in Maharashtra, and it did produce good result. And then we also had the operations in Kerala, and in Kashmir. So all of these de-radicalizations program have focused on the interaction with the community. So they are community-based programs, they are family-based programs. Capacity building has been a very integral part of it. And also very important part of it has been to now build a counter-narrative with the helps of the religious teachers. So that is another part of this program which is in the process. And I think the results have been good, whatever I have studied. But yes, given the fact that in our neighborhood we have such a strong move with this phenomena, the spillover impact you cannot
Absolutely.
overlook. So now we need to obviously strengthen the information domain as I think one area which Soumya talked about, the fact that how ISIS is relying on that. I think that is something India needs to strengthen and keep pushing for a regional approach, because only one country will not be able to deal with this challenge, since it is a challenge which is transboundary. You need a regional robust approach to deal with this.
Soumya, last word on what we need to be doing to ensure that the ISIS menace is under check, if not fully eliminated.
Yeah, so I will reiterate firstly the same point that our government has been able to do excellently in this approach of countering or de-radicalizing, because that is the core objective, and that should remain our focus area, because given the diversity of our country, we cannot say that we are immune to radicalization. We are very much vulnerable to this concept of radicalization, and ISIS has continuously tried to get its foot in the door by coming up with magazine like Voice of Hind, which from time to time talks about the local issues of India. So they talked about hijab controversy, they talked about Ram Mandir, Babari Masjid. So their focus has been India. So we cannot say that we are not somewhere in the radar of Islamic State. We are definitely part of this radar. And to continue the progress that we have made, firstly, the de-radicalization program is good. We should hire more experts on theology as government representatives to go out and talk to the community, and also involve people from within the community. Not everybody in the community is a challenge.
Yes.
We have a lot of people who are standing in support of our country.
Yes.
So we must involve them and make it an inclusive approach rather than an external approach out of the community, because we will have to bank on them because they are expert on their own religion.
Exactly.
So one of them is that, and I really want our country and India to focus on the online radicalization program, the lone wolf attacks that comes up. So even though a study conducted a few years back talks about that India is immune because we follow certain different ideology compared to what Islamic State does, but still online radicalization is something constantly there. Then financial terrorism, like funding of terrorism, which is coming through Gulf Connect from Kerala, that has to be checked through the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, and we need to do certain developments and amendments in that act to counter the hawala and all.
Right. So we need a multi-pronged approach to deal with a multi-headed demon like Islamic State. Viewers, the discussion is showing that Islamic State is very much around, it's resilient, and it cannot be underestimated. The ideological currents that drive ISIS ideology are very much around, and we are seeing in many parts of the world that they can really destroy societies. So our security is at stake, and we need to be much more proactive and think differently as well going forward to be able to deal with this. I want to thank our two experts for joining us today and sharing such valuable insights. Thank you so much, Shalini ji. Thank you so much, Soumya ji.
Thank you.
Viewers, ISIS is not going away anywhere. It's going to keep coming back in some form or the other, because the jihadist mentality and mindset are deeply rooted, and they have their own strategy and tactics to keep on proving their relevance. So we as a society and as a country need to be highly alert and also thinking deeply as to what we can do to make sure that this monster is under check. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.